Thank you very much for joining us again this week. I have with me Andy Scott, fresh from another big weekend of commentary. How are you going, Andy?
I'm good, thank you. Yes, Matt, I've been in Angers for the second time in a month, so I'm considering investing in property there at this rate. But
yeah,
it's very pleasant time. So
you sent us a photo of the second best flan in Angers, because our regular listeners will know Andy did have the third best flan in Angers, and we asked why he didn't get a better one, but you found the second best.
Well, so not only did I find the second, well, actually my girlfriend found the second best because she was looking for the best one. Naturally, only the best will do for her. But the best one was closed on a Saturday. But we found the second best one. Now, it is a boulangerie in the town centre, and helpfully, so you can't sit in, but helpfully, and I shouldn't say this, but I'm assuming that nobody from Marcus, the hotel where they have the cafe where the third best flan is, I'm assuming nobody is listening. But given they're just round the corner from each other, I had the brainwave of taking the second best flan to Marcus's coffee shop, which is a lovely outdoor terrace, having a coffee, a piece of their flan, and once we'd finished their flan, opening up the second best flan, popping it on the plate, and comparing the two, obviously trying to make sure that nobody was watching. The upshot of this is that the second best flan is, not that the third best flan is bad by any means, but the second best flan is noticeably better. It's just that bit flakier.
Well, I would say it's probably appropriate you had the second best flan because you were going to see the second best PSG team play against Angers.
Yeah, but I've not finished, Matt, because here's the thing, right? Here's the thing about flan in Angers and France in general. Did you know that you probably didn't? So I'm going to tell you this, and perhaps none of our listeners knew this. Last week, Tuesday or Wednesday, in Paris was the competition for the best flan in France. And the winner of the best flan in France, which is bad news if you're a Ligue 1 fan and associate all your trips around France based on who's playing in Ligue 1 and all the rest of it, the best flan in France is made by a boulangère in Metz. Somebody called something Rodriguez, and she has made the best flan in France officially. In the whole, not the second best flan in Angers, the best flan in France officially as of now. She's won a trip to Madagascar to see the vanilla beans.
Brilliant.
That kind of thing. Yeah, so there you go. Get yourself to Metz before the end of the season for a game and have a piece of their flan because it's the best in the country.
Okay, just writing a note to the editor to take out the flan chat at the beginning of the podcast. Tom Williams is with us now. Tom is he's our very own marathon man, the Adrian Thomason of the French football show. Because Tom wasn't eating flan at the weekend, were you?
I was not eating flan, although, after that delightful roundup of the latest flan news from flan correspondent Flandy Scott, I feel like I was missing out a little bit. Yes, I ran the London Marathon yesterday, and it was absolutely horrible, but also, enjoyable in a slightly perverse way. And no flans consumed during the running of the marathon, but I'm now aggressively catching up on all the carbohydrates that I missed out over the last little bit of training. So I will be seeking out flan options, probably more in Paris than in Metz, as quickly as practically possible.
Can I ask you a question about that? When you've been training to run a marathon, me being a normal, sane human being will never run a marathon. Do you just do like a Wesley Sneijder and stop doing any exercise at all, or do you have to kind of warm down and sort of gently reduce the amount of running you do to gradually get back to what would be a normal amount of running, or do you just stop altogether?
Oh, you mean post-marathon?
Yeah, like now. What are you going to do now when it comes to your running?
I mean, now, as of today, my legs are so stiff, I'm worried that when the podcast finishes, I'm going to remain stuck in my chair because I will be unable to return myself to an upright position. But no, I think I'll ease myself back into running very gently over the coming weeks. Sure. That's the loose plan.
Just in case anybody tuned in for some Ligue 1 chat, I'll tell you what I did this weekend. I went to the Orange Velodrome. I took my children and my wife, for that matter. It was a family trip. In the Tribune Gannée to see Marseille 1, Nice 1. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But first, I'm going to introduce the topic for the first part of the show. And it is about Olympique de Marseille. They were looking good for the league title. Do you remember that? October, November. They were flying under Roberto De Zerbi, second last season, spent a lot of money. Things were looking exciting. They've had quite a few crises since then. And in fact, as recently as March, the 26th match day, Marseille were third, 6 points above Rennes. 5 games later, they've dropped to 6th in the table. They're 3 points behind Rennes, the club that sacked Abibé before Marseille picked him up. They're 4 points behind Lyon and Lille, who had a great weekend. They've taken 4 points from their last 15. And in other words, they're in big trouble. Their season is falling to pieces. It feels a bit like there's mutiny both on and off the pitch. And the question we want to ask today is, can this change? Can Marseille stop going from high to low to the occasional high, crisis to crisis? Because right now it's difficult to see where this football club is going. Can Marseille once and for all become successful again? It's time for Le Dossier. Andy, I know you're a big Marseille sympathiser. You've had some great nights at the Velodrome. It's a wonderful city, a wonderful stadium, lives and breathes for its football. And my overriding feeling last night, I enjoyed it, obviously. The atmosphere was interesting. I'll tell you a bit more about that. But my overriding feeling is sort of one of sadness, because this football club deserves so much better. These supporters deserve so much better, and they got pegged back by Eliway's late penalty. Andy, it's difficult to see where they're going and what needs to change. An awful lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, obviously far too many things really for us to be able to sum up in a few minutes on a podcast. But I think that it's clearly just been a disastrous season for Marseille, not from the beginning, because there was that very promising time that you mentioned there when they beat PSG. They went off on a run of 5 straight wins, I think, and they looked good to probably achieve their objectives for the season. But things have fallen apart. Clearly, the divorce, the separation from Roberto De Zerbi was chaotic, was painful. They're struggling to pick themselves up after that. The problems run far, far deeper than just the coach, though. The management of the club at the highest levels has been not stable enough for a long time now, and it seems to have just all fallen apart at the same time, with the president leaving, Pablo Longoria, with Mehdi Benatia, the sporting director, being on his way out, and De Zerbi having gone. The decision to appoint Habib Bey looks like it's not going to work this season, because, they're going to be really struggling to get into the Champions League. I wouldn't be surprised if, therefore, he doesn't stay next season. It's like they need to really clear the decks and start from scratch. But I think it's just, the thing is, in the last 4 seasons, Marseille have finished in the top 3 on 3 occasions. They've got to 2 European semi-finals. They're actually, if you take all of that together, they're not far away from being at just about the level that Marseille should be. What Marseille should be is the club best placed to challenge PSG year on year. They should be able to finish durably as a top 3 or 4 club in Ligue 1. They should be able to sign top players, attract players to the Velodrome, which they can do, but they should be able to build an even better team than they have. They should be able to win the odd trophy. They've not done that for 14 years. But it's a problem that goes far, far deeper than simply the players on the pitch, the manager on the bench. And you have to look at the people who run the club at the top, and perhaps starting with Frank McCourt, the owner.
So last night, the atmosphere, I mean, it was very noisy because the fans had basically decided to give their usual sort of support and have their usual party in the stands, but sort of regardless of the players, it was almost like they were kind of ignoring what was going on in the pitch and having a kind of nice time. But when the players came out to the usual Van Halen song, we had the big banners in the Virage Sud for the South winners. They had a sort of 4-tiered banner saying, Frank McCourt, this is what you got to do. Number 1, call in the players' agents. Number 2, ask them for explanations. Number 3, tell them to respect the institution. Number 4, don't pay them anymore or sack them. At the other end of the pitch, we had a banner that said, leaders without ambition who shirk responsibility. 26-27, we don't know where we are going, but we are headed straight into a wall. So that was kind of like the scene setter, if you like, before Marseille played Nice. And Tom, we often talk about the context and the atmosphere, and it's it's difficult, isn't it, for those footballers? Marseille, they didn't play too badly. Højbjerg scored a diving header, and it looked like it was all going to end well. There was a big sort of outpouring of relief, and then all of a sudden, Marseille sort of dropped back. Nice decided to come forward a little bit, and guys like Pavard and who was there, Medina, who was the other centre back,
Valerdi.
And Balerdi, yeah. They're just not, they just don't give you any kind of reassurance. And it was so nervy. And Tom, they got pegged back, and it wasn't a big surprise, to be honest.
I mean, the atmosphere at the Velodrome and just around the club is simultaneously the great strength of Marseille as a footballing institution, but in many ways also the chief weakness, because there is just this constant volatility that is just baked in to the fabric of the club, and it has always been the case, and that is not going to change. The eternal noise, the febrility of that environment, and it's what makes Marseille such a captivating football club, capable of throwing up such captivating storylines season after season after season. And as someone who loves French football, you don't want that to ever change, but I think the decision makers at Marseille perhaps need to rethink about how they try to harness that. And what we've seen in recent years has been a desire within the club almost to mirror what happens in the stands and in the city by putting all these kind of like slightly wild figures in positions of authority. Pablo Longoria, the former president, Mehdi Benatia, the outgoing sporting director, and Roberto De Zerbi, the now former head coach, was a really combustible combination of characters. You talk about stability. We're always talking about stability when it comes to OM. When is the stability finally going to arrive? It did briefly look like it might have arrived with that triumvirate, and they had a long-term plan, and last season was supposed to be year one in a 3-year project, and they got back into the Champions League, and the fans and the players took to De Zerbi, and the football was fantastic, and then year two, everything explodes. They're clearly, and Frank McCourt is obviously piloting this personally, moving away from that now. Pablo Longoria has been bombed out, and the new guy who's come in, Stéphane Richard, is not someone who we're familiar with in French football, former executive at Orange, the telecommunications company, and doesn't seem to be, a rabble-rouser and a tub thumper. I think he's going to be a much more discreet president than some of his predecessors, notably Longoria. Whoever takes over from Benatia, I suspect, will probably be a slightly less volcanic character as well. And Habib Bey is someone who is less volatile than De Zerbi. So you can see what they're trying to do. And, it might seem like an oversimplification, but you look at the way that Marseille have dropped points this season. The goal that they conceded last night against Nice, that was the 12th goal that they've conceded this season in the 85th minute or later. On 4 separate occasions, they've been leading 2-1 going into stoppage time, and they've conceded an equaliser in 4 separate matches. And to me, that just speaks to a club where everyone is on a knife edge, the directors, the fans, the players. And so we just, return once again to this fundamental question. How do you try and bring a bit of stability, a bit of tranquility, a bit of peace and quiet to the middle of this maelstrom of a football club that is Marseille? And that does seem to be something that McCourt is trying to engineer currently.
Yeah, but you mentioned Habib Bey, but, I think he's gone. I don't think he stays beyond the summer. I think, I was there last night, a huge booze when his name was read out before the game. He didn't look to me, it's easy to say, isn't it, I guess, but he didn't look to me like somebody who had his sort of finger on this team. He didn't seem to be in control of what was going on out there. And I know there are injuries and circumstances are pretty difficult, but you've got to also look at that appointment. A guy who was sacked by Rennes, he's come to Marseille. He's overseen a bit of a pathetic, disappointing cup exit. He's seen Rennes surge above them. Rennes who keep on winning under Francaise, and it just kind of adds to this sense of like they don't know what they're doing, or it feels like they don't know what they're doing. Stéphane Richard, Andy, he seems to be like the opposite of Pablo Longoria, this kind of flamboyant Spaniard who pulls the strings, and he's going to bring in all these exciting players. And they brought in this guy who wears a suit. He's from Orange. He's called Stéphane Richard. And he seems very boring. He may be a very interesting guy for all I know. But perhaps they need somebody a bit boring. But Andy, when you look, they're not going to get in the Champions League. Barring a miracle now, they've got the second biggest wage bill in France. They're going to have to get rid of a lot of those big salaries. Who are you building your team around next season?
Okay, well, first of all, I think, obviously they don't look like they're going to get into the Champions League. I mean, I guess a few weeks ago, I think you asked Tom and I who we thought would get in the Champions League, and we both said Monaco. It doesn't look like they're going to get into the Champions League now. So it's a changeable situation. It's the situation in the league table is just as volatile as Olympique de Marseille as a club. But yeah, they've won one of the last 5 games. That was against Metz, who are bottom, who are about to be officially relegated, who've not won a game since November. They've won 4 in 12, going back to the end of De Zerbi's reign. So they don't look like that's about to turn around. The next 2 games, though, are away to Nantes and Le Havre. And if they can still be in the running going into the last day, then who knows? However, that's going to be fascinating.
They were just at home to Nice last night. I
know. But the last game of the season is against Rennes, which is obviously fascinating, right? Because it's going to be Franck Hesse's Rennes with the chance to perhaps completely finish off Habib Bey's Marseille. It might even be Habib Bey's last game in charge of Marseille, which would be incredible because one of his last games in charge of Rennes was away to Marseille. But yeah, I agree with you that I think it's hard to see how Bey's position can remain tenable if he doesn't qualify them for the Champions League. He was brought there to save the season, ideally win the French Cup, but also qualify for the Champions League. If he doesn't fulfill either of these objectives, there has to be no chance. That is just the way it is in management. A lot of clubs these days, it's hard to see how his job can be saved. I also think that from his point of view, he would have had the self-confidence to take that job, but he probably felt he had to do something very quickly to try to rescue his reputation after what had happened at Rennes. And it looks like it's going to backfire. He probably wasn't the right man at the time at Marseille. So a new coach, a lot of different players because they've got a lot of debts. They're going to have to clear the decks. They're not going to keep any of the players who've been on loan, the likes of Benjamin Pavard, Arthur Vermeeren. I suspect that players like Balerdi they'll try to sell on to recuperate some money for. Mason Greenwood's future probably has to be up in the air. I know that the chances of him going to England are obviously less than 0. There might not be too many clubs around Europe who could buy him, but perhaps somebody in Saudi Arabia, who knows, might come in for Greenwood. I think you're looking at, Aubameyang is probably not still going to be there given his age, even though he can still do the job. I think if they don't qualify for the Champions League, they're going to have to make some money by selling their 2 or 3 most sellable assets. They're going to have to probably look around Ligue 1 to sign some relatively bargain basement players. They're going to have to be really careful about their financial situation, which is not a good one. And I suspect, as you say, Matt, bringing in a president, as Tom talked about, a president who comes from a very different background to Longoria, will be more about getting the business side of things in order. And they'll have to look to a director of football who's got the ability to do a bit of wheeling and dealing in the market to sign the players slightly on the cheap.
But Andy's right, Tom. Like, the fans are fed up of Balerdi. They'd like, I think if they can cash in on him, they will do that. They're fed up of Pavard. They're fed up of Højbjerg. Even if he scored, he's been disappointing, having had a really good first season. Aubameyang's too old. So my question again, that Andy didn't really answer: who are you building? Which players are you building this team around next season? I'll venture a couple, which it's maybe not very helpful for you because you're looking to answer as well. But I guess Naif Aguerd is one. Maybe Timothy Weah, who seems to be reasonably popular. But it's a bit threadbare. Paixão? Tom, what do you reckon?
I mean, Aguerd, if he's fit, but he very frequently isn't fit. They've at least got a very solid goalkeeper in Geronimo Rulli. Facundo Medina has had a lot of things written about him in the last couple of weeks after tearing strips off his teammates. When was it? Last week, and would appear to possess the kind of grinter and the kind of winning mentality that Marseille supporters tend to appreciate. Quinten Timber, who's made a very positive impression since arriving in January. Amine Gouiri, when fit, made a fantastic start when he arrived last season, and is clearly someone who is capable of succeeding in the very difficult environment that you get at the Velodrome. Yeah, beyond that, I mean, Andy mentioned Igor Paixão, but like he's been one of the few bright spots, generally speaking, for OM this season. But he's a Champions League level player, and this is a real difficulty. You know that they have been recruiting like a Champions League club, and as of the end of this season, the chances are that they will no longer be a Champions League club. So, do those Champions League level players accept a season and potentially more without Champions League football? It's tricky. So, I think once again we're going to have another summer of huge upheaval, and that seems to be the case at OM, whether things are going really well or whether things are going really badly. But given, as we've said, the chances are that they are going to miss out on Champions League football, they really have no option but to kind of rip things up and start again almost.
Yeah, well, a word about the Nigerian midfielder Nadi that they bought in January. Made his first start, set up Højbjerg's goal. Looked okay. Maybe he's a player who has a future. I watched Vermeeren as well and just thought, why on earth has this guy not been playing more? Because he looked terrific at times in the first part of the season. Lost his place. Whether De Zerbi and then Bay had issues with him, I don't know. But he's a young guy who looks like a real powerhouse. And look. I think we've probably covered quite a few areas in this. It's a discussion that could last several hours. We don't have several hours, so that'll have to do for now. But hopefully, that's brought you a bit of entertainment or anguish if you're a Marseille supporter.